przyjeżdżam, to jak nigdy nie odjeżdżam. Przepraszam, że muszę po angielsku mówić, bo już polski tak nie mam z kim mówić. Mówiłem z mamą, z tatą, ale teraz nie mam okazji, ale mam nadzieję, że na przyszłe lata będę mówić więcej o polsku niż teraz mówię.
Właśnie tak jak pan Daniel powiedział, cała lekcja będzie w języku angielskim.
Dark time on the communism, under a very difficult political system. I acquired many things from my parents and to the people I met, our friends. A kind of Polish resistance to dictatorship, Polish identity, Polish freedom. I think these are things that stuck with me throughout my life, and I'm very often and rightly presented not as an American or as an Israeli, as Jewish, but as a Polish architect. Is this that
it's a unique city because Łódź is a beautiful city. Not just from the childhood, it is today a beautiful city. It has an incredible mix of architecture, of cultures that were here, that left incredible legacy. Of course, it's also a city that has suffered through the neglects of history. But I think Łódź is a very lucky city because it has the urban structure to really create something fantastic for our new century. So I think it's a city poised to become also a model of how to take this industrial era that is over into a culturally, socially new direction. I see a huge opportunity, not just for architects, but for people in Łódź.
Kolejne pytanie, proszę bardzo.
Will you create something for Łódź?
Will I create something?
Yes, project something, a building.
Well, I'd love to. It's hard for an architect just to create a building, out of his mind. A building has to address a site, it has to address a need, and of course, I'm very much a believer in Łódź, and I hope that I'll have a chance to contribute architecturally, urbanistically to Łódź.
Kolejne pytanie.
Which of your projects are most important for you? Are any?
Every project is important. It's like, I have 3 children, and you can't say like one is better than the other. The girl is better than the boy, the older is. Every project is like a child, and because it has a soul. It's not just a product of industry. So you can't. They're all different. Each one has a different character. They are, but each one of them, to me, is important. Even a small project.
Kolejne pytanie. Ponieważ mam przed sobą 3 strony pytań do pana Daniela Libeskinda, które są wygenerowane przez internautów rejestrujących się na spotkanie z panem Danielem. Większość z tych pytań została wyczerpanych podczas pana wykładu. Mimo to chciałbym przejść na pytania internautów w języku polskim, które będą też tłumaczone. Na przykład, co pan robił w wieku 25 lat?
It's true. My wife calls me a late bloomer because the Jewish Museum, which I started, as I said, in 1989 and finished in 2001, was my first building. I never built anything before. But, I don't think it's about quantity or it's about running to build buildings. You have to do something, explore architecture in different ways. And whether it was as somebody who drew a lot, who wrote books, that's all part of architecture as a cultural discipline. So yeah, it's not just building buildings. Architecture is more than building buildings.
Okay. Może, czy jest potrzebne tłumaczenie? Super.
Mr. Professor, talking about Łódź again, please. If you could imagine something like very, very, very characteristical point of Łódź architecture. Would you or could you change the Łódź urban space dramatically? I mean, do you think that such characteristical projects like your projects, very sharp in shapes, with very heavy, very sharp edges, would compare to this city? I mean, in general, if this city needs something like very dramatical change in urban space.
Of course it needs. History is not yesterday. History is today and tomorrow. History is not something in the past. It's something which is happening now. So it's not something which is dead. So my view is you have to take the history of Łódź as a living history. Of course, it's transformation of time, transformation of program, but you have to infuse it also with a new life. And for that, I think you need the dramatic. You can't just do it simply by repainting or replastering old walls. You have to change something in the structure of how these spaces are going on into the future. And so I am a believer that the context isn't there just as if it was ready-made. The context has to be recreated through creative process and through a participatory process.
Do you have a vision of Łódź? How should it look in the future? I mean, in architecture.
It should look great.
What do you have to do with the old factories? What can we do with the old factories and buildings that are destroyed?
Well, there are many strategies that can be used in a creative way to reinvigorate the old. And to make the old shine again, not with an illusion of the past, but with the energy of the present. So, yeah, it's true. My wife just reminded me, and I'm doing a very large plan, the port of Belgrade, which fell into disuse. It's a very large part of the city. The city never reached the port. The port was a huge sort of industrial, and of course the port has now disappeared. I'm in charge of producing a new plan for Belgrade. How to bring the city to the Danube, how to enjoy the water in a post-industrial society. And of course this is a very ambitious project because it includes not only iconic architecture and cultural architecture, but also a complete new urban structure that of course has to be sensitive to the history of the city, but also has to do something that will make Belgrade unique, not in competition with Vienna and other places on the Danube. This is what I wanted to say, that today's cities are in competition with each other. It's no longer just nations that are competing, it's cities. Of course, Łódź has to be in competition not only with Warsaw, but with other cities of the 19th, 18th century around Europe. And I think that's the challenge, to make Łódź stand out and send a message of Łódź to the world, that this is not a backwater of the old history that is gone, but that the creative input of the Vaidas, of the Tuvims, of all the great Poles that were here, can go into the future in an exciting and avant-garde way.
Do you have any memories from Łódź from your childhood?
Yeah, of course.
Could you tell us something more about
to me,
it?
when I was thinking about it, to me Łódź seemed to be so huge. When I was a child, it seemed to be vast, but when I just a couple of years ago came here and I walked, I realized it was only within a few blocks, but it seemed to be so big and so impressive as a city. And it is an impressive city, which has incredibly beautiful buildings. I was lucky to live on a beautiful street, on Piotrkowska, a beautiful street.
Piotrkowska, which number?
42. and so of course I have, as I said, once you live in a city, once you're born in a city, it's part of you. It's not something that is just external. It's like part of the genetic code. And so I think Łódź is in my projects, definitely. They may not be in Łódź, maybe somewhere else, but there is a sensibility that I believe I carry from my experience of the streets of Łódź.